When Battle for Neighborville released, it introduced us to 6 new character classes that weren't present in Garden Warfare 1 or 2. I'm sure over the last 6 years people have been wondering what it would be like if these classes were ported into Garden Warfare 2. So today I'm going to start off by porting Acorn into Garden Warfare 2 and eventually porting over every single class that's in BFN. So let's get straight into it. When it comes to porting these characters, we're not able to import the animations from BFN. So instead we have to think about what characters from Garden Warfare 2 use similar animations and then build that character into the one from BFN. There's multiple choices into what I could pick here, like Sunflower, Pea Shooter and Chomper, or even the Weeds as well, that could also work. But I decided on Pea Shooter since his animations are closest to what Acorn has in BFN. Now I have an idea on what character to rig the model to, I need to get BFN's Acorn model and then pose it ready to put in the game. So to begin with I decided to do the textures for Acorn since this would be important later on. You can see here I decided to go for more of a Garden Warfare 2 art style for it. For the eye texture I decided to base it off of the one for Cactus. Putting multiple textures on one giant map works really well when you're doing stuff in Frosty Editor. Now I have to set up the model ready to pose it over Pea Shooter. You can see here I'm scaling it up so it fits Pea Shooter's model. Now I've separated it so it's just the leaves. So here in BFN there's multiple different burns for each of the leaves, so it makes it a lot harder to work with compared to what's in Garden Warfare 2. You can see here I'm messing around with it a bit just to get it the right shape, then I'll move on to the other leaves and do the same thing for them. This is quite awkward since this is the first time I've worked with Acorn's skeleton, but you can see here I've got a decent idea on what it is and then I apply the textures. So now I have to map the textures manually since I've put it onto a big map. I decided to use Pea Shooter's body model so I could make sure the leaves are in the same art style. Normally mapping textures from BFN is quite difficult, but this one was quite easy since the texture map wasn't that bad. So the UV mapping was pretty easy, but this part here got a lot more awkward because I wanted to make it so the leaves are a lot less thick as they are in BFN, since Garden Warfare 2's leaves are normally a lot thinner like actual real life leaves. There's probably an easier way to do this, but this was my way of doing this idea. The idea is once I've done the leaves is I'm going to base the main face model off one that's in BFN. Since Pea Shooter's model doesn't support any facial expressions where we're going to be putting Acorn's head, I have to come up with an idea on what pose I want Acorn to be in game. So here I realised there's more leaves on the top of Acorn's weapons, so I had to quickly go through and UV all them as well. So I quickly looked up a video of Acorn just so I could see how these leaves are posed in game, so I could get a good idea on how they need to look. Now it was on to the face, which is probably the most awkward part because of how many burns there is on the face model for Acorn and literally every other BFN character as well. I went through multiple different ideas on how I wanted this to look. You can see here I've pulled up an image of Acorn and that's the pose I'm going to go with originally. I did end up changing it though later on to a more like an open mouth face that he has in game. The eyelids give me the most work out of everything on this model because of how awkward they are to move around. So just moving it around to try and make sure it looks just right because to me it kept looking a bit off all the time. The original facial expression I was going to go with is more of like a focus look I think. And now I've got in the little hat part and I noticed this thing on the top of Acorn as well. This kind of gave me a lot of bother because I didn't understand where this part of Acorn's model was from. So I load up the game and I messed around with Acorn a bit to understand where that little like stump part's from. I assume it's on one of his abilities, but then I realised it's part of Sap Trap, which honestly I find kind of cool. Because I never noticed that he pulls the little like switch whenever he fires Sap Trap. Even though this is a cool part of his design, I decided to get rid of it since there's no way I can use this inside the model. But now we have a good idea on how Acorn's going to look in game. So I have to finish off by UV mapping the head and then I can finally get this in game once I do all the rig. So I took a break from doing the model and decided to go back later on and change the facial expression. You can see here I'm going for more of a focused like angry-ish look for him now, the one that he has in game normally. I've just got to make a few more changes to the eyes and stuff to make sure I can try and capture this face, but obviously at the moment the eyes are going to be in like one place. I did change them later on to move around there. So now I've finished off the rig, this is the first test that I got. This is the second test I got. You can see I've changed the animation a little bit. I changed the rig to not be as harsh and you can see here this is the result that I got. You can see the overall model is kind of getting there now. I added a few texture maps to it as well for a bit more detail, but it's still not finished just yet when it comes to the model. So I decided to scale it down now and give it its own kit file and start to actually try and get things working properly. You can see here he's quite small, even smaller than what I ended up going with, but you can start to see the overall idea starting to come together with the model now. And if you listen to his voice, you can start to hear that he's playing actual Acorn sounds now. can see he's got all of the jump sounds, they'll have the hurt sounds as well, and the death sounds too. So now the model is in, it was important that I start working on the weapons. You can see this is the first test for the main primary weapon Acorn has. I was also messing around with his physics a bit. I was going to give him a double jump, but I decided to go back on this later on. You can see the overall idea is now coming together very well. But obviously there's still quite a lot of work to do, especially when it comes to this weapon. It does have its sounds though. Now we have the first of his abilities. This is the Sat Trap. I decided to build it off of an unused weapon that is the Impulse Grenade for the laser Gerts, because it already works similar to what I'm going for, so it kind of gives me an easy base to work off. Trying to get this weapon to actually work how I want it to was a pain. It kept firing itself really far, or it just never went to my feet whenever I looked to the ground, so it was becoming quite a pain to work with. But eventually I got there with multiple tests. You can see here it just bounces forward constantly. So now it's starting to actually work properly, and I made it so it launches me up whenever I stand near it too. Made it so it now does a bit more offense to zombies too. It does 65 damage to nearby zombies and also launches him up too, so it kind of gives that same feel like it has in BFN. So now I've got some sound effects and effects going for this now. You can see it's somewhat similar to what it has in BFN, but there's still some work to do. So this version of it has a bit more effects going on. It also has some sounds added to it now. It's kind of more close to what it should be. I think it's also got the model in now. I can't really tell because it's too fast to really see. So earlier on I mentioned about making the eyes move, and you can see here this is the first test of doing that. To make them move, I used a shader that a bunch of different cosmetics use in the game when they have like an animal with eyes that move. It's something like UV random scroll. If you put it on this, you can make the eyes move. Made some changes to the shader, and you can see now it don't move the eyes anywhere near as much as it did before, but it moves them enough to give him that feel like he is definitely alive and not just a static model. So now it's time to work on the dash. You can see I'm trying out a few different ideas for it, and I was going to make it so it uses the little knockback animation pea shooter has, and it is the one I eventually went with. The idea was to make him use the animation when you go in the cannon, but it seems like you can't make it so it does that animation without it just launching you. So I messed around with a few of the things a bit more, and you can see here the whole idea is somewhat coming together with a dash now. I've stuck with the little knockback animation as well. I added some sounds to it too, but I also changed around the values on how much it sprints. You can see here it takes you quite far. Here you can see I'm trying to test a cannon animation without it doing this, but it seems like I can't activate it without it just launching Acorn. So with all that done now, I have somewhat of a basic idea on what the main kit for Acorn is. You can see here, this is every ability working in some capacity. Obviously it still needs icons and other stuff, but it's all working at the moment. We don't have Urk in yet because that's what we're going to have to do next. With Urk, I decided to begin by just rigging him to Torchwood to see how it would work. Yeah, I'm going with Torchwood for this. I don't see any other character I could really rig this one to. So I've done a data transfer that makes it so all of the rig from Torchwood goes onto Urk, and then I just have to do a bit of cleaning up on it afterwards. It's not very consistent, but it gives me a good idea on how I want it to look, and in some cases it does most of the work for me. Now I've deleted a bunch of the different vert groups, I have to go and clean everything up and make sure every single vert is rigged, otherwise it just doesn't import in the game. So I UV map Urk and then I clean it up a bit, and then we're finally ready to get this guy in the game, but after this it's going to be a bit of a pain to get this thing working properly. So here's Urk's model in game. It is quite messy and does need some fixing, but you can kind of see how he's going to look once it's all finished. So I finally got Acorn's little Urk call thing in. You can see here it's using a placeholder weapon, and it does have a sound as well, but that's also a placeholder. But you can see here it just crashes the game instead of actually working. So this crash was caused by bundles, which is the main thing that causes most issues that you'll run into when modding this game. To put it simply, bundles are different files that contain every other file for a certain weapon or asset. If some files aren't in the correct bundle, then the game can just crash upon it using it. In the case of my little Urk transform, it uses a polymorph, which is only meant to be in the character shared bundle, which is the universal bundle that most characters use. But the buff to transform into Urk, the one that's meant to it's going to play the Yodel sound, is in the weapon shared bundle, which is another universal bundle which you'd think would work, but it doesn't because Frosty Editor is really weird and so is Garden Warfare 2. So now I've explained the main thing that winds me up with modding Garden Warfare 2, let's get back onto Urk. So I fixed all the issues with the main bundle problem, but now I realised that it wouldn't apply the buff to turn me into Urk at all. And the main reason why is this. So if you're building a weapon that's going to polymorph you into something, you're probably going to build the polymorph off of the Gertify ability. Now this isn't in itself a problem, but the issue is that the Gertify is only restricted to enemies and not teammates. Which means if you apply this buff to yourself, you are technically your own teammate, which means it doesn't apply. It took me about half an hour to realise that this is the problem, with me thinking it was a bundle issue to begin with. And I wasted so much time loading the game because at no point it came to my attention that I never set it up so it would apply to a teammate. So now we have the first technically successful test of the Urk transform, but once again the problem is bundles again. It turns out the model also has to be in one specific bundle to work. So after a bunch of tests I finally got a somewhat functional version of the Acorn transform, and I thought I had got rid of like the hardest part of this entire thing, but it gets worse from here. So the first thing I needed to do on Urk was make it so when you use the middle ability it cancels him out. You can see here it was all successful, but this took once again nearly an hour to get working properly because I didn't know how to set up the connections properly. I'd get into how connections work, but I don't even know how they work, so I can't really explain it. I made it so he yodels when he goes into the ability as well. And he also has some effects that show around his mouth when he activates the ability. It seems like everything's going all well, but once we get into the abilities, things aren't going to go so easy. So the first weapon I was going to make for him was roll for damage. This is the thing where he fires a log and it rolls on the floor before exploding. I thought I could do this pretty easily, making a weapon similar to how Engineers works in BFN, but instead of bouncing it just rolls. And it applies a buff to anything near the projectile, which knocks them back. I thought this was going to be so easy that I got a bit too confident with it. And it was really difficult, and it spent near enough an entire day to get it working. You can see like everything I'll show now is every single test before I changed up my idea on this. So the first test, you can see here it just bounced on the floor before exploding. After that it seems to actually be getting somewhere. If you see here you can see it's kind of working how it should. It's damaging the zombies, it's pushing them back. But then I decided to change something I don't even understand how it works to try and speed it up, and this happens. And now the weapon just decided to not even like roll at all, it just exploded immediately. So it became quite clear that I was just breaking a weapon that was somewhat functional to be just not functional at all. So I decided to talk in my Discord server about what was going on and see if anyone had any other ideas, and I was suggested that instead of making it a projectile, instead I spawn a character in, and then make it just sprint tackle towards the enemies. I didn't think this would work, but I decided to try it out in game anyway just to see how it would look. So here we have the first test for roll for damage, using Chomper as our little guinea pig. You can see it kinda works. He launches himself forward and he's knocking zombies back, which is exactly what we want this thing to do. Outside of the speed, this thing is working pretty well to be fair, considering it is a Chomper that is just sprinting towards zombies. So I made a bunch of changes to this without filming it, and now we actually have some form of a functional roll for damage. But we need to get the actual login, and you can see on screen this is the first result I've got. Is not great. And it's mainly because this is working with emitters, which is probably the messiest thing to work with in Frosty. So after multiple hours of tedious changing values to get what I'm after, this is the result that I got. As you can see, it now rolls, which is exactly what we're after, but it still needs some changes. Currently the main problem is there's no effects on it, so it just looks like the guys that get hit by it just randomly die. But for the moment I'm going to instead work on sap trap, since this thing isn't actually very difficult to make, since we've already made the regular sap trap on the regular Acorn, and super sap trap is basically the same thing. So now all of the abilities for both Acorn and Urk are finished, it was time that we get some icons and names on these abilities. So for the icons I decided just to make them the ones from BFN, since it already worked for what I was after. Now I didn't realise the icon for Urk for the middle ability to eject was the wrong one, but I decided to leave it as this instead of the one that's used in BFN, since I think this one looks a bit better. And finally we have all of the metadata done for Acorn. You can see he's got an icon there, he's got an icon on the party HUD, he's got full names and everything. It looks all so cool, but the problem is we still don't have object tags, which is the little like icons that appear above each of the characters in the game. So using a mod for split screen, I was able to test this out after getting Acorn icon. You can see here it's a bit weird, it shows two icons. I don't really know how to fix that, so it's going to have to stay like that for the minute. So finally I gave Acorn a little icon of his own, you can see it above him there. And with the icon done, that means that everything for this character is now done. I did do a few changes to effects and stuff without recording it, so I have made a few more changes and I might make even more changes later on as well. But for the most part, Acorn is now complete. So with all of this finished, I will now show you gameplay of the complete product. So yeah, thanks for watching this video. If you did enjoy, feel free to leave a like, maybe subscribe if you want to. If you want to play this mod for yourself, I'll leave a link in the description below for you to download it. And let me know if you want me to do more of the BFN characters as well, because I'm willing to do 80s, Snapdragon, all the other ones if you want me to. But yeah, hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next one.